One sim, 100 babies. Is it possible? Well, I decided to find out. The 100 baby challenge is a classic, and we've seen a lot of variations of it through the years. I decided to play it by my own house rules. Rule number 1: there's only one mother, and she must have 100 babies before she turns into an elder, or else I fail the challenge. Number 2: the mother must leave the home lot to meet up with guys, and she may only visit one community lot once a day maximum. The only exception to this is during her college years, when she may leave to attend her final exams. In order to allow her to leave the children behind, I will use a mod called Kids and Pets Unattended by Boiling Oil, which basically disables the social worker. Rule number 3: the mother may only attempt to seduce the men who randomly show up on the community lot. If there are viable men, meaning 1 bolt of attraction or higher, on the lot, she cannot attempt to seduce a man that she has already had children with in the past. If there are no other viable men on the lot, she must choose the man with whom she had children the longest time ago. This might sound easy enough, but I'm using Simler's Romantic Standards mod, which basically makes Sims have, well, romantic standards, meaning that they are a lot more difficult to romance, and that most of them remain faithful to their spouses. Rule number 4: to earn money, the mother may not take up a job. She can only sell things that she has caught, grown, crafted, or written. Her children may also sell such things if they can, but they may not use Monique's computer to write articles. The mother, however, may do so. But 100 babies, that sounds impossible for one mother, you might think. Well, I do use an aging mod that affects the length of the Sims' lives, but that won't be enough indeed. So I've come up with some rules and a reward system to make it possible. So, rule number 5. The mother will be rewarded with a number of days added to her lifespan once any of her children has aged up into a young adult. The number of days she gets back depends on how successful the child was. If the child learned all 3 toddler skills from the mother, she gains 1 day. If the child was taught how to study by the mother, she gains 1 day. If the child was an overachiever, meaning that they reached the top of a teen career, combined with having top grades, she gains 1 day. If they maxed out a hobby, she gains 1 day. And if they received a skill-related scholarship, she also gains 1 day. So in total, she can gain 5 days maximum from each child. I may not use Smart Milk to speed up the toddler skill learning. And I use Simler's homework mods, which makes it a lot slower for the children to learn how to study. 1 attempt certainly won't cut it. Additionally, I use Simler's slower skill gain mod, so things will be very slow and painful for sure. So, I have all of these things that will make this harder for myself. Do I have anything that will make it easier? Well, I do use Merola's time control clock to slow down the speed of time to 50%, which is my favorite setting. So, in a way, that will make things a bit easier simply because I'll have more time on the home lot to get stuff done. However, it's also a bit of a double-edged sword because it's not only time that slows down, the need decay and the relationship decay still run at normal speed. So, in other words, the Sims' mood will drop a lot faster than normal, and friendships will slip through their fingers like sand. Normally, I counteract the quick need decay by giving my Sims need-related aspiration benefits, but in order to make this challenge work, I'm going to have to use those for other things. Let me explain. This is Liana Blackwood, our heroine, or villain, depending on how you look at this challenge, I guess. In order to make this work, she's going to have to be a primary family sim. Why? Because she needs the aspiration benefit super fertility in order to reliably get pregnant at first try, and in order to have a high chance of twins. And she needs to be a secondary romance sim in order for her to actually want to jump from guy to guy. Also, the massive attraction benefit is going to be super useful once she can afford it. As for Lifetime Wish, I gave her the Woohoo with 20 different Sims one because, well, it just made sense. This is the house she will start out in, a pretty cramped but cheap apartment. And she, of course, will begin as a freshman in college. The community lots she will get to visit are located in downtown, where she lives. I didn't have the time or patience to renovate any of them myself, so I got 3 out of Yodely Yodely slots and plopped them down. It was cold issue clothing, party until really early, or pure for short, and the hub. I'll leave links to them in the description box if you want them as well. With all of that out of the way, let's just start and see how it goes. The first day began with whipping up some quick breakfast. Not having any skills at all in cooking, Liana ended up just scarfing down a cheese sandwich, and after dutifully cleaning up the plate, she tightened her shoelaces and headed out to the first community lot. Seeing as it was still too early to go clubbing, cold issue clothing seemed like the natural choice. Upon arriving, there were a few little details to take care of. First, Juan Ramon was sporting a frankly unacceptable case of Max's hair and got a quick emergency makeover. Second, I spied a teen and remembered that I needed to get the visitor controller out for some adjusting. Seeing as I wanted the challenge to be hard, but not impossible, I had decided to restrict the ages to only allow adults to visit the 3 lots that I was going to use. So that's what I did. And finally, I brought out the sim blender to randomize the gender preference of the entire hood. I hadn't used that function of it before, so I fiddled around with the gay and bi settings for a bit before going, seems about right, hitting run, and sort of just accepting where it ended up, which was at 11% gay and 6% bi. With all of that sorted, Liana started running about, greeting all of the guys on the lot to see who she'd find attractive. She met Mitch, who she didn't find attractive at all, and then she slipped off into the staff room and met Juan, whose new hairdo sadly failed to impress. They do say that 3rd time's the charm though, and sure enough, Tallinn DPS walked through the door and became the first attractive guy Liana had ever met. After a quick makeover, I could somewhat see where she was coming from and decided to have them strike up a conversation. After that lukewarm interaction, she headed towards the changing rooms where she met Robert, who turned out to be yet another unattractive option. I soon realized that both the diva and Mr. Big had arrived on the lot, and seeing as we can only have a set number of community lot visitors at once, I decided to rudely ban them, and thus preventing them from hogging 2 of the very valuable slots I had available to me. With them gone, a few more sims started to arrive. One of them this cute boy band looking guy, Damien Dallas. Shockingly, Liana didn't think much of him, and as soon as a better option arrived, she completely blanked him in favor of her first 2-bolter, Dixon Phillips. Even though Liana kept backing him further and further into a corner, things went well and they were soon off on a date. After some witty jokes, a slightly inappropriate pillow fight, some flirting and back rubbing, they were standing in the middle of the sofa and time was running out. But, thankfully, after some more flirting, Liana got her first ever crush and things were looking up. They kept going, sticking to strictly flirting, hugging and hand-kissing for now. If you've played with Simler's Romantic Standards mod before, you know how reserved some sims can be. So, before I actually saw Dixon getting a crush with my own eyes, I didn't dare having Liana attempt to kiss him full on the lips. But after a long string of romantic interactions, I took a look at Liana's needs, and after learning that the sofa was actually just decorative, I grew quite anxious to get them up in relationship sooner rather than later. Fully expecting her to get rejected, I queued up a romantic kiss, and was surprised to find that Dixon actually wasn't as stingy as I had originally feared. After that, I went all out with the kissing, and soon they were making out like there was no tomorrow. So, thinking that this might be close enough for a cheeky woohoo, seeing as the guy seemed so easily persuaded, I sent Liana to try on some clothes. Things were looking promising as Dixon calmly walked up to the changing booth, only for him to shockingly back out, apparently outraged by the thought of woohooing with a complete stranger in the middle of a clothing store. Needless to say, Liana was utterly humiliated, and soon after that, Dixon left the date complaining that she didn't care about his needs. After having a short cry about it, Liana rolled a want to buy a love potion, and I realized that her confidence must be at absolute rock bottom at this point. So, taking pity on her, I decided to call it a day and sent her back home. Back at her apartment, Liana spent some hours looking after her needs. She had a refreshing shower, baked some homemade croissants, curled up in bed for a nap, and spent another hour or 2 in her PJs watching TV. Fully recovered, she headed outside to work on some body skill, which she needed for her class performance. I eventually realized what a horrible choice in skill I had made, because after an hour of jumping jacks, she had barely made it halfway up the skill bar and was completely done with the whole thing. So she headed inside, where she found a rose from Dixon on her doorstep, and she couldn't even make it into the shower before Mr. Boyband called her up as well. With that little confidence boost, she had her shower, whipped up some dinner, and settled down on the sofa to read up on cleaning. With that skill acquired and out of the way, Liana had reached the bare minimum for being able to gain enough class performance to pass the term. Happy with that, I sat her down to do some researching, but she couldn't keep that up for long before her quickly decaying needs had her back in the kitchen for some leftover soup, and then straight into bed. A new day dawned, and as soon as her energy bar was full, I sent her straight out of bed, into the shower, then into the kitchen to scarf down another croissant, and once all of that was over with, to the second community lot in the mix, Pure. After the compulsory visitor controller banning session, Liana headed into the club, desperate to socialize and have fun. As she was getting down to the beat, people started to trickle in, and, wonder of wonders, who showed up if not Mr. Dixon himself? So, needless to say, I felt that Liana had this in the bag, and they were soon off on their second date. After some initial appropriate dancing, things started to get heated, and it didn't take long before they both started to roll woohoo wands. There was no rush though, Liana was feeling good and there was plenty of time. So I actually managed to hold myself back from jumping the gun this time. My patience was soon rewarded as Liana lowered her hands during an intimate slow dance, looked deep into Dixon's eyes, and fell in love for the first time. So far, I hadn't seen any red hearts over Dixon's head, but fully confident in their two-bolt attraction, their dream date status, and Liana's warm feelings, I sent them over to the photo booth for a second attempt at impregnation. I was holding my breath at this point, hoping dearly for Liana not to get rejected again, and thankfully this time things did work out. They had their first woohoo, but since I'm playing without sound, I had no way of knowing whether it was successful or not. So, after a short makeout session, they went back into the booth and I got it confirmed. Liana was pregnant. In celebration, I had them take a romantic photo to commemorate the moment, and then it was time to end the date. That didn't mean that Liana had to leave at once though. She had gotten what she wanted, but there are more fish in the sea, and seeing as she was still feeling okay, I sent her off to meet some more guys to hopefully find at least one more attractive sim. Soon enough, she did. She met Phil, her second two-bolter, and they quickly struck up conversation. That was when Mrs. Crumplebottom showed up for the first time, looking absolutely livid as she headed over to the bar for a drink, handbag held at the ready. If only she'd been a few hours early. After making friends with Phil, Liana was starting to feel exhausted, and no wonder since it had actually turned into day outside. Even the shrubbery had given up all pretense, so it was time to call it a day. As Liana strolled back to the apartment, I realized that she was in platinum mood, and sure enough, she had acquired one aspiration benefit point to spend. I did consider the massive attraction reward here, seeing as she's only met 2 guys so far who were above 1 bolt, but seeing as I had successfully gotten her pregnant, I decided to instead prioritize the needs and pick the one for social and comfort. Well at home, Liana headed straight into bed, but I didn't let her sleep for very long because at 6 a.m. it was only 5 hours left until her final exam. However, looking at the job and skills tab, it turned out to only be 4 hours. She really had to do something drastic if she wanted to make it. So, I sent her off to the kitchen to complete some assignments, hoping that it would be enough. After completing one, her class performance was still in the red, but it would have to be enough, there simply wasn't enough time. She hurriedly took a shower and sat down to chug down some soup, barely able to keep her eyes open. That was when I realized that it wasn't an hour until the exam. The exam was in progress, so in order to not fail completely, Liana dropped everything and ran to her exam, exhaustion and hunger completely ignored. 2 hours later, she returned, getting a passing C for her efforts, and entered into her sophomore year. Feeling victorious, she headed inside, fell asleep standing by the elevator, eventually made it upstairs, threw up in the toilet, and stumbled into bed. That is when I realized that something was amiss. I hadn't just imagined that time had started to run out faster than I could keep up with. Time had actually started to pass by 2 hours at a time. Frustrated, realizing that I had lost valuable time this way, I instantly deleted the semester tester, bought a new one, and held off for an hour before starting it, just to get back a little bit of the time that I had lost. While fiddling with that, Liana called my attention and got her first baby bump. With her energy somewhat recovered, I took the opportunity to send her into the kitchen to finish up the breakfast soup she had started on some hours before. A pair of bowls later, she was back to an exhausted state, and I had to send her back into bed. Confident that she wouldn't drop dead from hunger, I let her sleep until her energy bar was full again, and then had her have another shower. Once she was feeling refreshed, I decided to buy her something really filling to eat, and ended up ordering a pizza, thinking that I'd save her valuable time that she could use for gaining enough fun so that she would eventually be able to study. That turned out to be a lapse in judgment because, although in theory it would be time efficient to order takeout, with a tiny apartment lot and a delivery person who rings the doorbell once and then walks all the way downstairs again, things ended up dragging on needlessly until the pizza was just dropped on the dirty communal floor for Liana to pick up and eat. After all that was done with, I took a moment to get Liana dressed in something that would actually show her pregnant belly properly, before sending her back upstairs to have some well-deserved pizza. Once she'd eaten her fill, she went back to the TV and ended up watching the Yummy channel until she gained a cooking skill point. With that done, she only had to earn one more point in either cleaning or cooking, and I felt confident enough to send her back into bed. She ended up sleeping until midnight, when she had to get up for a visit to the loo, and she only had time to glance at the cooking book before she had to get up off the sofa and give birth to twins. It turned out to be 2 girls, and after consulting with Behind the Names randomizer, their names turned out to be Heather and Elizabeth. They both were born in these oddly flat diapers, which told me that my baby default wasn't working properly. So I quickly remedied that by making them both unselectable and then selectable again, and then using Plan Outfit to get them into proper attire. Once the kids were looking presentable, Liana started to feed Elizabeth, while I proceeded to squeeze 2 cribs and a changing table into the tiny room. Once that was done, Liana took care to also feed Heather, and then it was back into the kitchen for some celebratory stone-cold pizza. Feeling quite good about herself, Liana changed back into her favorite t-shirt and settled down to catch up on her studies. She made quite good progress, and apart from a brief diaper-changing break, she managed to study pretty much undisturbed. I realized somewhere midway that she had earned another aspiration benefit point, and ended up going with the slower bladder and hygiene decay. Spoiler alert, huge mistake. Huge. Once she had gained her cooking skill point and thrown out the rotten pizza, Liana headed back to bed and woke up all refreshed at 8:20. After a bathroom break and some tomato and ham sandwiches, she settled down for some studying, took a break to change some diapers, did some more studying, and then left the newborns to fend for themselves as she headed out to the hub to go hunting for baby daddy number 2. Upon arrival, I brought out the visitor controller to ban everyone except for adults, and once Liana had made it onto the dance floor, I spied the diva and decided to ban her as well. Unfortunately, it turned out that both the diva and the bartender were called Renee, so I accidentally banned the bartender as well. So there were no drinks to be had. But Liana wasn't sad about that. She was fully occupied by tearing up the dance floor and scoping the room for her next target. Her attention was eventually drawn to one Bolt Benjamin, who seemed to be looking for a good time. They struck up conversation, and a few compliments, jokes, and a back rub later, they had become friends, and he agreed to go on a date. That's when I learned that he was a knowledge sim. And I thought to myself, oh god, this is going to be rough. I wasn't wrong. After some initial friendly interactions and some dancing, the flirting game was on. Liana flirted her little heart out. She whispered in his ear, hugged him close, and kneaded his back until her hands ached, and yet he would not even slow dance with her. So she kept working on him. She flirted, threw herself into his arms, and trailed a row of kisses up his arm, and still nothing. Eventually, time was starting to run out, and Liana's needs were at rock bottom, so I decided that enough was enough and that this date had to end. Utterly defeated, Liana headed out of the club and had nearly made it off the lot when a new visitor appeared. Unable to resist the temptation, Liana followed him back inside, eager to introduce herself. This time, her efforts paid off, and she met her third two-bolter, Han. Sadly not feeling up for another date, Liana had to give him a pass for now and headed back home just as Mrs. Crumplebottom was arriving. 2 women coexisting, but heading in complete opposite directions. Returning home, Liana was feeling utterly exhausted, and so she headed straight to bed. Her hunger eventually awoke her, and she ended up inhaling a bowl of leftover soup. She'd barely swallowed the last of it down when she got a random call from Dixon, but she needed the bathroom so bad at that point that she ended up rudely hanging up on him. Once she was freshened up, she chugged down another bowl of soup, but since even that wasn't enough to sate her hunger, she had to start on a new meal. After a short diaper-changing break, she was finished with the spaghetti and could finally eat her fill. Of course, at that point, she was back into an exhausted state and had to go back to bed. She managed to get a few hours of sleep in before Heather started crying for attention, and so she had to get up and feed her babies. Once that was done, it was straight back to bed, and once her energy was passable, I had her get out of bed to view some of her artwork for some quick fun. In the process, I learned that Liana's one true hobby is arts and crafts, which is good news, seeing as she will have to earn money for her family some way in the future. Then I sent her to read up on cleaning, and after another diaper change and some hours hitting the books, she succeeded. After that, I sent her to the computer to write her first term paper. My plan was to attempt to get an as good grade as possible, seeing as the money reward is higher the better the grade is. Once the job was done and she had maxed out the performance bar as much as she could, she was, once again, feeling absolutely terrible. So, after doing the usual to get her needs back into shape, it was closing in on her final exam. The repo man took that moment to send a gentle reminder, so Liana paid her bills, attempted to get some sleep, fed the babies, changed the diapers, and then headed out to her exam wearing her PJs and giving 0 woohoos. She made it into junior year with good enough grades to earn herself 700 simoleons, and after respectfully declining the changing of aspirations, Liana fell asleep standing by the elevator, headed properly into bed, and slept until woken up by the babies. Again. After the usual diaper change, she settled into the couch to watch some TV, used the bathroom, had dinner, and, completely ignoring her quickly decaying energy level, headed out to Pure. She settled down at the bar, hoping that a drink would give her a boost of energy, and found to her dismay that none other than Dixon had arrived to make her evening needlessly complicated. Sure enough, it didn't take long for Han, the guy she had checked out at the hub, to arrive, and there was no doubt that feelings would get hurt. After spending some time catching up about rejected public woohoos and babies, Han agreed to go on a date, after which I learned that he was another knowledge sim. The date started out innocently enough, but it didn't take long for Dixon to figure out what was going on and get absolutely infuriated. He stood glaring at Liana as she passed by to join Han in a very misplaced pillow fight, but after stomping over to the DJ booth, he became so immersed in the music that he didn't appear to care what was going on behind him. So, the date kept going, and Liana was so exhausted she could barely get 1 or 2 interactions in before she started swaying on her feet. But through sheer will alone, she somehow managed to pull through, and her relationship with Han was steadily getting better and better. After a particularly warm romantic hug, they both got a crush on each other simultaneously, and after that, the game was on. Innocent caresses and hand-holding turned into squeezes and make-out sessions. Their relationship was increasing steadily, but with all of the energy desperation fits, things took far longer than they needed to. Eventually, the couple was up to a dream date, but at that point, time was starting to run out, and they had only just barely made best friends. Hoping that the date ending would bump their needs up enough for him to accept her advances, I had her waiting for him outside of the bathroom, ready to attack him with kisses as soon as he walked out. But, sadly, with only 15 seconds to spare, Han decided to call it quits and head home, complaining that I don't care about his needs. Feeling annoyed at having been so close, and getting a strange sense of déjà vu, I sent Liana back onto the dance floor to introduce herself to a few more Sims. She ended up meeting Quinton, another two-bolter, and she struck up conversation with him, hoping to at least make friends. Soon, I saw Peter Sims lurking in the background, and I really didn't want him to be involved in this. I'm sure we all have certain Sims who make us slightly uncomfortable. Peter Sims is definitely one of mine, but to my horror, Liana ended up thinking that he was pretty attractive, so after an emergency makeover session, I still didn't see the appeal, but at least he wasn't looking as bad. After that, Liana was so dead on her feet that I didn't have the heart to make her stay, and she headed back home after yet another unsuccessful night out. So she came home, fell asleep by the elevator, eventually made it upstairs, and finally settled into bed. She got about 1 second of sleep before she was awoken by the starving babies, and after nursing Elizabeth for a couple of minutes, she quickly moved over to Heather's crib to help her with her birthday. After Heather had successfully turned into a toddler, I started to move some of the furniture around in preparation while I waited for Elizabeth to age up as well. The room I had furnished wasn't exactly optimized to fit a large number of Sims, so some changes had to be made. After cuddling Elizabeth for a while, it became apparent that her aging wasn't triggering, so I fished the Sim Blender out of the catalog to speed up the process. After I rudely awoke Liana from another standing nap, Elizabeth joined her sister in toddlerhood, and the refurbishment could commence. After some fiddling, I managed to squeeze 1 bunk bed, 2 toddler beds, and 2 cribs into the room, and still leave some space open for playtime. Once the room was finished, the toddlers got some well-deserved makeovers, and after dropping a pair of bottles onto the floor, Liana was finally allowed to get some rest. But it didn't last very long, because once the girls had properly eaten, they were both in desperate need of some potty training. So, dead on her feet, Liana dutifully taught them, one after the other, until all 3 of them collapsed into bed and, thankfully, slept their fill. In Liana's case, that only meant sleeping until 12:30, because once she was fully rested, had a shower and something to eat, it was time to get back out to the hub. The place was pretty much dead upon her arrival, but as she got down to the beat, both dreading and desperately wishing for another baby, people started to trickle in. At first, it appeared that the best available option was Peter's Sims, but then Mr. Boyband appeared. And it turns out that absence truly does make the heart grow fonder, because as he appeared before her, Liana realized that he was a two-bolter, and gladly threw Peter aside. So, Liana struck up conversation with Damien, and soon enough he agreed to go on a date. Things were looking really promising, I thought, until I noticed that he was another knowledge sim. Hoping that things would work out despite that little detail, I started spamming the friendly interactions, and then kept going with the mildly romantic ones. Liana got a crush in record speed, but Damien wasn't so easily swayed. After hours spent on the usual routine of sly flirting, gently hugging, enthusiastically massaging, and carefully kissing hands, he still wasn't moved. So, starting to grow impatient, I went for a romantic kiss to test the waters, and he instantly shied back. After recklessly attempting to initiate a slow dance, which he also rejected, it was back to the old routine. Truly, it seemed like nothing she did was working on Damien, and after they had only just become best friends, he decided that he'd had enough and was heading out. Apparently, I don't care about his needs. Outrageous. Well, Liana was having a blast at least, and as the first guy left, the second one had arrived. Catching him just as he was falling out of the dance sphere, she quickly wrapped Phil around her little finger, and they were off on the second date of the night. Of course, that's when I learned, well, you guessed it. Are you kidding me? So, the date started with running around the bar area pillow fighting, quickly followed by some flirting, which promptly had Liana get a crush for the second time that night. True to form, Phil did not fall for Liana that easily, and after enough romantic interactions to have their long-time relationship bar sit at a comfortable 63 points, Liana went for a romantic kiss, which was, of course, promptly rejected. So, I kept going with the safe options, until Liana, the poor girl, fell in love. Phil was, however, still completely unmoved by her advances, and still didn't allow her to get anywhere near his lips. Eventually, they were so far up the relationship bar that I grew reckless enough to send them to the hot tub upstairs, in hopes that cuddling in that romantic setting would push Phil over the edge. Now, that was all well and good, but I hadn't considered that Mrs. Crumplebottom might be lurking up there, using outrage as an excuse to hang around the scantily clad youngsters. Well, did I let that stop me? Of course not. Soon, Liana and Phil were cuddling in the hot water, and I was doing everything in my power to keep that old lady at bay. Soon, Liana had given Phil enough back rubs that I made a brave attempt at a makeout. Phil confidently shooed everyone else away to make room for what was about to happen. Needless to say, that soured the entire thing, and the two of them were soon getting out of the hot tub and hurried downstairs to get away from Mrs. Crumplebottom. Somberly accepting facts, Liana gave Phil's cheek one final caress and then walked back home, utterly defeated. Once back home, she freshened up and headed straight to bed. The toddlers woke up bright and early, and Liana made an effort to potty train Heather, but was only just too late. She did manage to get Elizabeth on the potty in time, though. I took a moment to give the girls some aspiration benefits for slower need decay, but sadly, Liana hadn't earned enough points for anything new. Seeing as it was a whole day minimum until she could go out again, Liana started her day at home by taking out some bottles for the girls, burning her breakfast to a crisp, throwing that out, and doing it over. Once she'd had her non-burnt croissants and cleaned up the kitchen, she settled down in front of the TV to work on her cooking skill. Once that was done, she potty trained the girls again, and then sat down with Heather to teach her how to talk. About 2 hours later, the girl was taught and Liana got a well-deserved bathroom break. Once she'd had another nap, Liana took the girls to the potty again, brought a pair of bottles out of the fridge, and had some leftover spaghetti. Then she gave Elizabeth a bath in the broken tub, called the landlord to request a repair, and then settled down on the kitchen floor to teach her second daughter to talk as well. With that done, she potty trained Heather some more, and then settled back into bed. Once she'd recovered her energy, freshened up in the newly repaired tub, had some sandwiches, and watched TV, she sat down at her computer to write her term paper. She defeated the twin demons of procrastination and distraction with 4 hours to spare before the exam, and used that time to get some more sleep, change Elizabeth's diaper, potty train Heather, get the girls a pair of bottles, grab a quick shower, and then potty train Elizabeth as well. After that, it was off to the exam. At 11, she returned with a not very satisfying reward of 500 simoleons, but also with the good news that she would only need to gain 1 more point in cooking in order to pass her senior year. Happy with that, she headed upstairs to give Heather a bath, potty training her, as well as Elizabeth, exchanging the stinking bottles for fresh ones, having a pair of lunch sandwiches, cleaning up, and going to sleep. She slept until 6, when her energy bar was full, and shortly thereafter she finally taught Heather how to use the potty. Elizabeth followed suit only moments later, and thus they both only needed to learn how to walk and they would be all set. Wasting no time, Liana started with Elizabeth, and 2.5 hours later that was all done as well. Liana spent the rest of her evening giving Elizabeth a bath, feeding her a bottle, taking a refreshing shower, watching TV, and having some spaghetti for dinner. Then, once the clock had passed 12, it was fair game again, and ignoring her rather low energy levels, I sent her out to Pure. Upon arriving, it looked, once again, like there was no good option to go for besides Peter Sims. While greeting one of the girls to procrastinate in hopes of someone else arriving, Count Darren Barr decided to creep up on her from behind. Thankfully, he didn't appear to be hungry at the moment. Then, Benjamin turned up, and things were looking a little bit brighter. Sure, Liana only had 1 bolt with him, but they did have the advantage of already having quite an advanced lifetime relationship bar. So, with that in mind, I sent Liana at once to greet him and ask him out on a date. It started well enough, despite Liana's exhaustion, and they quickly made friends. Once the wants had gone from friendly to romantic, which was in no time at all, I sent them off on flirting, hugging, kissing hands, well, you know the drill by now. And wonder of wonders, Benjamin actually ended up getting a crush before Liana this time. Emboldened by that fact, I had them advance to kissing, and it didn't take long before they were making out at the bar. Eventually, Liana ended up with a crush as well, and once they had reached a dream date, I had nearly maxed out both relationship bars. So, I sent them to the photo booth in hopes that it would be enough. Liana was getting really tired, and I didn't want to risk Benjamin leaving the date early again. So, as the two of them climbed into the booth, I held my breath and decided to go for it. Sadly, their relationship turned out to not be good enough for Liana to attempt it, and after struggling with getting anything done, what with Liana's constant exhaustion fits, Benjamin finally called it quits and left the date early anyway. Not to despair though, not only did Liana learn a cleaning skill point from that disaster, The dream date ending also brought her mood up a little, so she was good to go for round 2. At first, the only choice appeared to be, again, Peter Sims, but she gladly threw him aside once Phil arrived at the club. Liana might be tired, but she had a maxed out relationship with the guy. He might not have neither a crush nor any feelings of love towards her, but still, they were BFFs. Surely I had this in the bag. Well, she still couldn't kiss the guy, so things weren't looking all that great. Apparently completely friend-zoned, Liana did her best to woo him, but after a good while of no progress at all, she decided to end the date early, because look who had arrived to save the day, Han. Quickly jumping from one date to the other, Liana wasted no time, and thankfully, what with his strictly platonic feelings, Phil didn't appear to mind whatsoever. The date didn't start great, because Han didn't turn out to share Liana's dirty sense of humor, but after that little misstep, things were getting heated fast. Liana got a crush, while Mrs. Crumplebottom stood grimacing behind her back, and soon enough Han followed suit. A few makeout sessions later, Liana fell properly in love, and as Han headed over to the bar for a drink, she nearly got caught in the middle of Peter and Shelby's drunken fight. A good while later, Liana was mere moments away from passing out, so I took pity on her and sent her to the photo booth for a second attempt that night. Han hadn't fallen in love with her yet, but seeing as he did have a crush on her, and that they were BFFs, my hopes were still high. Once they arrived, Liana turned out to be too tired to even get into the booth, so I sneakily ended the date in order to get her mood up a little bit, and then, after some strategic kissing, they headed into the booth for real. This was it, the moment I'd been building up to. I clicked try for baby, and I was at my wit's end. I mean, seriously, how hard should it be for a young, attractive woman to get lucky in this place? Well, Liana seemed to take it on the chin at least, and she took care to hug Han close before she left, making sure that things wouldn't get awkward between them. What a trooper. Back at home, she fell asleep by the elevator, and once she had finally made it into bed, temperatures dropped and it started to snow. Once the little family awoke, the whole hood was covered in white, and things were looking suddenly a lot less bleak. Liana changed Heather's diaper, got herself freshened up, took out a pair of bottles, and had a croissant for breakfast. After that, her mood was the best I had seen for a good while, and she took that opportunity to teach Heather to walk. She got about 3/4 of it done before the kid was too tired to go on. So while she slept, Liana dressed in something warmer and sat down to watch the Yummy channel and earn herself the last cooking skill point she needed for her degree. Once she had nearly reached it, the kids woke up, and Liana went back to teach Heather how to walk, and thus completed the toddler skills for her first children, and earned herself 2 days to her lifespan in the process. After getting the girls their bottles and then freshening up, she grabbed a quick sandwich. I took that opportunity to check whether she had gained any new points to spend, but sadly, she hadn't. Both of the toddlers had though, so I maxed out both of their need trees. A little bit later, once Liana had gone back to sleep, the clock struck 6 and the girls aged into children. Elizabeth was first out, and after a quick makeover, I took a look at her and saw that she was actually quite similar to her mother in personality, although a lot neater. Heather was next, and after giving her a makeover as well, I saw that she was also a Libra. On one hand, unlike her sister, she was sloppy like her mother, but a bit nicer on the other hand. After that, it was time for another refurbishment, and once I had moved things around enough to fit another bunk bed in there, it was a tight fit, but still homely. Liana said goodbye to the intrusive neighbors and sat down in front of the TV to finally gain herself that cooking skill point. As the girls started playing with one another, I decided to put their toys into storage and buy them a proper dollhouse so that they could play together. Once done with the cooking skill, Liana sat down to write her final term paper, which, to my surprise, didn't give as much class performance as the other two had. Leaving that problem for later, I set her off to watching some more TV, and then to cook up some dinner. Heather attempted to go to sleep, which was when I realized that the beds couldn't be accessed the way that I had placed them. So I flipped them around, and that took care of that problem. I also realized that I had forgotten a ladder, so with that bought, the family was down to an abysmal 237 simoleons, and I was dreading the point when they would have to stock up the fridge. The carbonara was done, And soon, Liana and Elizabeth were sitting down for their first proper meal together as mother and daughter. After that, both children had gone to sleep. Liana had had a shower, and she spent the rest of her energy that night writing 2 assignments, which pushed her performance bar into the white, and that was good enough for me. The next morning, Lily Doe randomly walked into the apartment. She might have run inside in fear of the great black wolf standing ominously outside the door. Eventually, the wolf and Lily had gone. Liana had recovered her fun after an hour in front of the TV, and the girls were heading out to their first day at school. Elizabeth was so eager she didn't even take the time to dress in her outerwear. But Heather was far more reasonable and walked out to the bus calmly and in proper attire. Shortly thereafter, Liana headed out to her final exam, and at 11, she had graduated. Normally, I would just age the sim up into an adult at this point, but seeing as I needed as much time as possible for the challenge, I ended up allowing Liana to use the extra 72 hours she had gotten. Not only that, after having a well-deserved plate of carbonara, Liana turned out to finally have earned herself another aspiration benefit point, and finally, I could grant her the massive attraction benefit. This was certainly a day of celebration, and I was super excited to see what change that would make to Liana's progress. All throughout her college years, she had only managed to get pregnant once. Not for lack of trying, of course, but I was confident that this perk would be the edge that I needed in order to push past the bad luck that she'd had so far. Eager to try it out, I had Liana clean up after lunch and head straight out to cold issue clothing. I noticed the difference as soon as she arrived. First of all, Christian Landry, whom she had previously had a crossed-out bolt with, she now had 1 bolt of attraction with, and that was only the beginning. Next, Saitrario arrived, who was previously a 1-bolter, but who was now up to 2 bolts. Liana pounced on him, and in no time at all, they had gained some relationship points and agreed to go on a date. That was, of course, the moment when Alejandro walked through the door, and after giving him a quick makeover, I realized that he had gone from 2 to 3 bolts with Liana. Of course, when I realized that, Saitrario had just agreed to the date, so I ended up going ahead with it, despite there being an oh-so-tempting 3-bolter on the lot. I instantly regretted everything upon learning that I had another knowledge sim on my hands. But the date was on, and perhaps I would be luckier this time. It all started as usual with some tickling, pillow fighting, and chatting. After some flirting, Liana got another crush, and, happily, Saitrario followed suit. Thus began the kissing, and their relationship was building steadily. Things truly did look promising. They kept going at it as day turned into night, and eventually made best friends. Soon enough, the date got up to dream date status, and amazingly, Saitrario fell in love with Liana. Could this be it? Eager to get things going, I sent her to the changing booth, crossing my fingers and hoping that finally things would turn around. Of course, that's when the game decided to play me by sending her date to try on clothes as well, which disabled the option to invite him to woohoo, and time was starting to run out. With only 15 seconds to spare, Liana had finally made it into the changing booth, and I asked Saitrario to join her. He walked up to the booth, and apparently, not even being in love is enough of an argument to make this guy stoop down so low as to woohooing on the first date. And with that, the date was over. Just as the two of them said their thanks, Mr. Three-Bolter decided to make his entrance. So, Liana chatted with him for a bit, hoping to build up a tentative friendship at the very least. Saitrario at that point got the cold shoulder. Well deserved, I thought. After some chatting about prison, making out, and food, two unfortunate-looking townies got makeovers, and Alejandro decided to make his escape. No matter, Liana quickly turned back to her difficult date, and did all she could to build up the relationship even further, in hopes that, if they were at 100 on both scales, he'd finally give in. But sadly, after an hour of intense cuddling, Saitrario also escaped in a cloud of green stink. So, what was Liana to do but try her luck with the next best stranger? Purposefully ignoring Peter Sims, she headed into the overcrowded and filthy staff room, and met Darren Hurt, another three-bolter. Striking up conversation, They were constantly getting distracted by the stinking plates, and it certainly didn't help that Liana was exhausted at this point. So I sent them out back for their date, which started out looking quite promising. This guy wasn't a knowledge sim, so that fact alone made me instantly hopeful. But after several of his failed attempts at flirting with a very stingy Liana, I realized that things weren't heading in a good direction and ended the date pretty much as soon as it began. And just in time, because at the very same moment as the date ended, none other than Han walked through the door. After a very unfortunate attempt at kissing Liana, who was having none of it, things did start to move in a promising direction. A handful of kisses later, Han finally fell in love, and it was instantly off to the changing room. Could this finally be it? As Liana headed to the booth, Han was momentarily distracted by Peter, and then made his approach, and to the outrage of everybody else in the store, they did it at last. I was, of course, beyond ecstatic at this sudden silver lining, but playing without sound, I didn't trust it, so I sent Liana back into the booth, clicked on Han to ask him to join, and got it confirmed. Liana was pregnant. Feeling victorious, as you might imagine, I sent her back home to get some well-deserved rest. As I left, I spied Mrs. Crumplebottom, who had arrived only just too late. Not today, lady, not today. So, Liana came home, fell asleep by the elevator, used the bathroom, and finally made it to bed, just as Saitrario came by to drop off a huge bouquet of red roses, which I promptly sold. Every single penny counts. After a short nap, Liana got up to eat, and Heather happily earned 200 simoleons by joining the school band. Liana sat down to scarf down her spaghetti that she promptly fell asleep in, and that was when the girls arrived back from school. Elizabeth got a report card, which was apparently pretty meh. Liana fell asleep in her second plate of spaghetti, and the girls sat down to watch some TV, completely ignoring their mother as if it was nothing out of the ordinary. Well, to be fair, to them it probably wasn't. After choking down some more mouthfuls, Liana left the dishes to Elizabeth and headed straight back to bed. The girls spent some time watching TV, freshening up and playing around while their mother slept, and just around the time when Liana got out of bed, the girls had settled in for a nap instead. So, Liana took a bath, had some more spaghetti, and once the girls had regained some energy, it was time to start with their homework. Heather was first up, and soon Liana interrupted the teaching by getting her first baby bump. Then it was back at it again, and soon the homework was finished. Then it was straight back at it with Elizabeth. In no time at all, that was done as well, and both Liana and Elizabeth headed straight back to bed, while Heather spent a few more hours awake playing with the dollhouse. At 12, she went to sleep as well, and a new day dawned. At 3:30, Liana woke up and got her second baby bump. Then she headed down to pay the rent, pick up the thank you notes she'd earned from some of the less successful dates, and went back to cook up some nice breakfast pancakes. She happily ate 2 platefuls and then sat down to watch TV. Looking at the family's funds, I realized that they would have to start earning money now that Liana had graduated, so I went ahead and bought an easel with the last of their money. After realizing that the recent mod I got wouldn't let her paint and sell paintings as easily as she would have in an unmodded game, I had her start up a painting, but thought to myself that I should probably have her write some articles instead, which would be far more lucrative at the moment. The girls headed out to school, and just as they were catching the bus, Liana went into labor and gave birth to another set of twins. At this point, I had fixed the default baby clothing, so the kids looked presentable as I was randomizing their names, which turned out to be Nicholas and Caroline. I took a moment to look at the family tree, happy with the progress, and then set Liana off on caring for the babies. After kicking the intrusive neighbors out, she used the bathroom and went to sleep. Once she'd nearly recovered her energy, the babies woke her up, demanding a diaper change. Then, after a refreshing shower, she went back to painting, desperate to earn some money. Of course, once it was done, she earned a total of 1 simoleon. The twins returned from school as Liana fed the babies. Once that was finally done, she was both starving and exhausted, and so set off to serve up dinner. That was when the dreaded thing happened. Food had run out. With a total of 6 simoleons in her pocket, things were looking quite desperate. So she settled for some leftovers and steeled her resolve to start earning money some other way, because painting obviously wasn't cutting it. Once she'd stilled her hunger, the whole family settled down for a nap and woke up collectively as the babies pooped their diapers in unison. I finally figured out that the reason why the babies turned into black shadows every time I put them down for a diaper change was because I had accidentally shifted the changing table below floor level. And then it was time for the kids to get help with their homework. That was done in no time at all, and then it was time for Liana to have another shower. And as I debated sending Heather to bed, I learned that she had the arts and crafts hobby, and so instead sent her to practice painting. Elizabeth, who had already gone to sleep, turned out to have the cuisine hobby. So, two very useful hobbies, I must say. After she'd had some dinner, Liana headed to bed, and soon thereafter fell ill with a cold. Halfway done with her painting, Heather eventually went to sleep too, and not long thereafter, her mother woke up and settled down at the computer to start earning some money for real. She utilized all of the cooking skill points she'd earned as a student and wrote an article worth a smashing 316 simoleons, getting cured from her cold in the process. After taking a moment to pay the bills, Liana gave the babies a diaper change, and as she started feeding Caroline, for some reason, that accidentally woke the children up. Heather took the opportunity to keep practicing her painting, while Elizabeth watched TV in the kitchen. After freshening up, Liana got the glamorous task of unclogging the toilet, and I attempted to have Elizabeth read up on her cooking. After realizing that the bookshelf was inaccessible where I'd put it, I moved it into the kitchen instead, where Elizabeth could pick out the cooking book without issue. Not used to manual labor, Liana was soon momentarily defeated by the toilet, but after a quick break in front of the TV, she had calmed down enough to manage it after all. The girls headed out to school, and Liana did some cleaning, ate breakfast, and wrote another article. I could have sent her out on town at this point, but I realized that without money to fill up the fridge, a new pregnancy and more mouths to feed would be quite disastrous. So, after another quick diaper change, she got the second article finished and earned 362 simoleons from this one. At that point, she was exhausted and had to go to sleep. But that wasn't meant to be because, despite being in a seemingly all-green mood, Nicholas was demanding attention. I started with a cuddle, thinking that he might need to be burped, and that did seem to work at first. But after Liana had gone back to bed, having given Caroline a quick cuddle too, he started crying again. Thinking at that point that he might be hungry, I had Liana feed him. But that didn't last very long, so she gave him another cuddle and put him back into bed, but he was still crying. So, already dreading the result, I asked Liana to play with him and, as you might expect, she ended up with throw up all over her. Nicholas was happy though. After a much-needed shower, Liana joined her children for a nap, which didn't last long before she had to get up and change diapers again. The family went back to sleep, and at 6 p.m., Nicholas aged into a toddler and got some nice new clothes. After taking a look at him, I realized that he was freezing. No wonder, seeing as it was in the middle of winter, and I used a temperature mod to make things a bit more extreme. So, after buying and turning on a radiator, I sent Liana to have some dinner, and then it was time for Caroline to age up as well. Once she got an appropriate attire, I refurbished the room a bit, realized that the easel was blocking one of the toddler beds, and ended up putting it on a walk-around block, which appeared to work perfectly. Once that was done, it was finally time to buy some groceries. Although she couldn't fill up the fridge completely, it felt like a great accomplishment. After that, it was time to work on homework, and midway through teaching Heather, the food was delivered at long last. So, Heather kept going with her homework, but didn't quite make it. Elizabeth earned another cooking skill point, Liana started potty training Caroline, and then it was back to bed. Liana woke herself and Heather up in the middle of the night. Who needs a circadian rhythm anyway? And they continued with the homework until it was all done. Then it was Elizabeth's turn, and as she got out of bed and Heather simultaneously attempted to make it, I realized that the walk-around block had fooled the unmade bed mod I used, that the easel was in fact a piece of decoration, which meant that it disappeared every time the beds were used. So, after bringing Elizabeth into the kitchen for some studying, I had Heather make the bed and reveal the easel so that I could have it moved. At first, I thought I could keep it on the block to make the routing a bit easier in the small space, but it turned out that just ended up making the painting animation super wonky. So I just ended up setting it down properly on the floor. Soon thereafter, Heather finished her first painting, which sold for a whopping 4 simoleons, 4 times the value of her mother's painting. And then Elizabeth finished her homework too. After that, Liana freshened up and then took care of Nicholas, who had soiled his diaper. Caroline got potty trained, Nicholas got a bath and was then brought to the potty as well. Liana brought out a pair of bottles for the toddlers and then sat down to watch TV as they ate. The toddlers headed to bed and Heather finished another painting, this one worth 5 simoleons. Then Liana attempted to get some sleep in, but the dollhouse was in the way, so I attempted another spot for it and things seemed to work out after that. The girls headed out to school, the toddlers get busy with the dollhouse, and after some quick potty training and cleaning up, Liana had a shower, ate some leftovers, and then the clock struck 12, and it was time for her to finally age into an adult. So I brought a cake out, and there she went. For some reason, her face completely glitched out, but after a quick makeover, she was looking like her old self again. After that, I had her clean up the cake without even tasting it. Why? I honestly have no idea. I suppose I thought that she was full, so she didn't need it, but in hindsight, that seems pretty cruel. I'll have to make it up to her next time. After that, she settled down to write an article, because they were, once again, in desperate need of money. This time, she earned 451 simoleons, so things were steadily improving. A little later, the girls returned from school, and Nicholas woke up after his nap. Liana took him to the potty, and once he was done, Caroline had just woken up too and got trained as well. Then Liana got their bottles out and went to sleep as they ate. Once she woke up, Caroline got a bath and so did Nicholas, after which he was brought into the kitchen to learn how to talk. The girls woke up from their nap, and after Heather complained that her mother blocked her path, the TV was moved to the other side of the room. Then the talk practice had to be interrupted in favor of the potty, and after Caroline was brought to it as well, Liana collapsed into bed. Heather and Elizabeth spent the evening working on their hobbies, and once Liana had recovered enough energy, they got their homework done as well. Liana freshened up, ate a midnight snack, and then continued to teach Nicholas how to talk. She had to take a break to bring both toddlers to the potty, give them their bottles, and then she was so tired she had to go to sleep. Morning dawned, and after cleaning up the stinking bottles, Liana sat down to finish teaching Nicholas to talk. Then she brought Caroline to the potty, successfully teaching her, and then Nicholas followed, but he had a little bit left until he'd be taught. Then it was Caroline's turn to learn how to talk, but Liana eventually grew so bored that she couldn't keep it up. But after a shower, requesting a repair from the landlord, watching TV, and having some delicious grilled cheese for lunch, she felt good enough to feed the toddlers, finishing potty training Nicholas, and then keep going with Caroline. Once she'd learned how to talk, the toddlers only had to learn to walk, and they'd be all set. First, though, Liana had to take another nap. The girls returned from school, utterly bored, so I sent them out to the playground out back to get some fresh spring air. After Liana woke up, she started at once to teach Nicholas how to walk, which happily didn't end up taking much time at all. Heather and Elizabeth were both exhausted once returning from the playground, so as they slept, Liana gave Caroline a bath and then set off to teach her to walk as well. They got about 3/4 of it done before Liana's exhaustion had her send the toddler to bed, use the bathroom, and then head to bed herself. At the same time, Heather woke up from her nap, headed to the bathroom as well, which she was very kind to clean up a bit for her mother. Elizabeth woke up too and went at once to the kitchen to study cooking. The girls then sat down for a midnight snack of delicious pancakes together, before Elizabeth headed to the bathroom as well, and Heather went to work on her painting. Liana woke up then and had the last pancake, after which she helped Elizabeth with her homework. I realized that I had forgotten to give the toddlers their aspiration benefits, so I filled out their need trees, and shortly after that, Heather finished another painting, this one worth 9 simoleons. It wasn't much, but at least it was something. Once the homework was done, Elizabeth went back to studying cooking, while Heather got help with her homework instead. Then she went back to painting, and Liana spent a while watching TV. After that, she had some breakfast grilled cheese and went to bed. The kids got some sleep in too. The Reaper Man sent a gentle reminder, and the toddlers woke up screaming for a diaper change. Once that was taken care of, Liana got them a pair of bottles, paid the bills, and freshened up in the bathroom. Then she finished teaching Caroline to walk, and the toddlers were all set. They had learned all 3 toddler skills, and Liana had earned herself another 2 days back to her lifespan. In celebration, she cooked up some pancakes, and they all sat down to enjoy their Saturday morning together. Liana went to sleep, and Heather had finally earned enough points in creativity to graduate from the kids' paintings into something more advanced and, hopefully, more lucrative. Once her energy was back to full, it was finally time to send Liana back out on town to make an attempt at the next pregnancy. At Pure, things were looking the same, and as Liana got down to the beat, who decided to show up if not Mr. Boyband? She greeted Damien happily, and also took the time to greet another two-bolt stranger who appeared shortly after, but her eyes were set on Damien, and after some polite conversation, they were off on a date. Soon, they were tickling, pillow fighting, and joking, which quickly turned into flirting. Liana got a crush at once, and she was quickly followed by Damien. Things were going really well, and soon they were making out like there was no tomorrow. Amazingly, after not very much time at all, they both fell in love simultaneously. It was going so well that I hardly believed my eyes. Knowing Liana's track record, this was nothing short of a miracle. In the middle of it all, I nearly got a heart attack when I saw Hans' portrait pop up. But after some investigation, it turned out that he was just walking by this time. Bullet dodged, Liana soon brought Damien to the photo booth, and upon clicking try for baby, they got at it without fuss. Hardly daring to believe my luck, I sent them back in there to double check, and sure enough, Liana was pregnant. I celebrated by taking some romantic photos of them, and then promptly ended the most problem-free date yet. Seeing as Liana was still feeling great, she headed back into the bar area and struck up conversation with the three-bolter Quinton. Once they had made friends, she moved over to two-bolt Phoenix, just preparing for future conquests. When they had made friends as well, Liana's pregnancy had made her needs drop quite drastically, and it was time to head home. Liana returned, fed the kids, gained a new perk to slow down her hygiene and energy decay, freshened up, and went to bed. At 4:30, she had earned back enough energy to get up and eat. When the hour struck 6, it was time for all of the kids to age up. First up, I had to pick aspirations for Heather and Elizabeth. I ended up just rolling a die, which turned Elizabeth into a fortune sim and Heather into a popularity sim. A few makeovers later, I took a closer look at the kids. This is Heather as a teenager, quite the stunner. And this is Elizabeth, equally as beautiful. This is what Caroline ended up looking like, and just like her mother and sisters, she turned out a Libra. Unlike the others though, she was more outgoing and otherwise pretty much straight down the middle. This is Nicholas. Surprise, surprise, also a Libra. He turned out to be extremely playful and nice, and a little bit neater than his mother. He was pretty similar to Heather actually, upon closer inspection. Once that was done, Heather and Elizabeth settled down to work on their hobbies. Once Liana had recovered enough energy, she sat down to write another cooking article. She got her first baby bump and continued writing. My goal was to earn enough money to buy the new bunk beds I needed for the kids, and once she was done, I could afford the top bunk. The bottom bunk was too expensive though, so after a bathroom break and a brief nap, Liana went back to the computer to write another article. Elizabeth cooked up some dinner, and after Heather had sold a painting worth a whopping 41 simoleons, things were starting to look better. Heather cleaned the bathroom, Elizabeth fed the kids, I bought the bottom bunk, and Liana finally sold her second article for 488 simoleons, which afforded them the ladder as well. Liana had the last leftover grilled cheese, and then went back to bed. Things were looking quite cramped in the bedroom at this point, and I was starting to wonder where I would fit the baby or babies in that Liana was currently carrying in her tummy. At 4:30, she woke up to get the second baby bump, went back to bed, and then woke up properly at 7 a.m. While the kids slept in, she got some breakfast and then wrote an article. Realizing that this apartment really had become too small for a growing family, I resolved to have her earn some extra money so that they would be able to move into something bigger soon. At nearly 75% done, she got up from her seat because it was time to give birth. Unfortunately, this time it was not twins, but simply a baby girl whose name randomized into Martina. One good thing about it just being one baby was that I was able to fit her in quite easily under Liana's bunk bed. So, issue averted, temporarily. Once that ordeal was over, Elizabeth got rid of the intrusive neighbors and Heather sat down to look for a teenage job. Another goal of this challenge was to have the teens be overachievers, and they needed to reach the top of their teen careers, combined with having top grades for that. So Heather got herself a job in the journalism career, while Elizabeth served up some breakfast for her mother and siblings. I sent Nicholas and Caroline out to the playground to get them out of the cramped apartment, and Heather got back to her painting. Once Elizabeth had gotten herself a job in the culinary career, she went back to studying cooking, while Liana took over the computer to earn some more money from writing articles. Although the day started out pretty hectic, things calmed down around noon, and Liana earned 410 simoleons from the first article, and immediately set off to write the second one. Midway through, she had to get up to change Martina's diaper, which was quickly done, and she could get back to writing. The children were still out playing, and checking their hobbies, I couldn't see which one was their true hobby. But after consulting the sim blender, I learned that Caroline preferred nature activities, while Nicholas was very into games. With that knowledge, I sent Caroline to go bug hunting, while trying to figure out what to do about Nicholas' hobby. I settled on having Liana buy him a handheld game online, after finishing another article worth 498 simoleons. The game set her back 245 simoleons, but Heather ended up selling another painting for 56 simoleons, so things were starting to look better and better money-wise anyway. The girls would, of course, start earning a little from their part-time jobs as well, so I was feeling confident that they would be able to handle a bigger apartment shortly. Liana handed Nicholas his game, which for some reason didn't make him end up with it in his inventory, so I just moved it over manually, and he could start playing. After she had used the toilet and had a refreshing shower, Liana sat down to write yet another article, while Heather and Nicholas were bonding in the bedroom. Seeing as their mother was so busy all the time, I thought it important that the kids could take comfort in each other. Once she'd sold the article for 510 simoleons, best one yet, Liana went to sleep for a while. Elizabeth returned from her first day at work and happily earned a promotion at once. She just needed 1 point in logic, then she'd be all set to max it out in record speed. I sat the kids down in the kitchen to try and work on both their hobbies and their skills. Elizabeth and Caroline were no problem because I just sent them to read up on cooking and cleaning, but Nicholas was another question. I use a mod that lets the kids earn creativity from playing with toys and logic from playing games, but for some reason it wasn't triggering for him while he was playing the handheld or on the computer. Suspecting that I would have to buy him a console to get it working, and also considering the fact that once he'd maxed out his fun, he would just stop, I decided to have him read up on cooking for now and resolve the issue later. Liana woke up, and seeing as it had turned into spring, I decided to give her something fresh to wear. Then, I took advantage of her good mood and sent her out to the hub. The club was pretty calm as she arrived, shortly followed by the dreaded Peter Sims. Would this be the day when she would go for him? I really hoped not. Sadly, the second guy to arrive was none other than Han, and that could only mean one thing. This was the night when he would have his heart broken. After striking up conversation with Peter, someone far more interesting walked through the door, and Liana quickly dropped Mr. Sims in favor of her longtime beau, Benjamin. On the way, though, she paused next to Han, and, having grown quite fond of him at this point, and also remembering how things ended with poor Dixon, I decided to go easy on him and have Liana ask to just be friends. It seemed a worthy ending to their fling, and I felt good about it. Liana then went to find Benjamin at the dance sphere, and I saw that he had become a two-bolter. Just after he had fallen out, with Liana hovering behind him, Han walked up to them and, without the input of any interaction whatsoever, got a new crush on her. I had never seen anything like it before, so, of course, when Liana started flirting with Benjamin, Han ended up getting hurt despite my attempts to spare him. After some making out, during which Han stood hovering awkwardly behind them, Benjamin fell in love, and they headed quickly up to the hot tub to get things going. Meanwhile, Han had settled down at the bar, looking heartbroken as he downed his drink. Poor guy. Moments later, a very stealthy Count Darren Barr appeared, looking hungrily at Han. Perhaps there were worse things to worry about tonight. Upstairs, Liana had her own worries. She had successfully made it into the hot tub, but look who was up there lurking. Skillfully ignoring the old lady, she soon wrapped Benjamin in her arms, trying her best to ignore the awkward nudist, and they were soon making out. At that point, Han arrived to stand staring at them. No matter. Liana finally managed to seduce Benjamin, and the deed was done. But, to my horror, before I could double-check that it had been successful, the guy fled. So, as Liana got told off by Mrs. Crumplebottom, I couldn't do anything about it. I was left to wonder. Liana soon showed me quite clearly that she had had enough, so I sent her back home, eager to find out if she was pregnant or not. Well at home, she headed straight to bed, and despite being quite tired herself, Heather ended up helping her with changing Martina's diaper. Then they both settled into bed, but the other kids were still feeling all right. Elizabeth headed to bed first, but both Caroline and Nicholas stayed up to read and eat. Hunger soon awoke Liana, and after scarfing down a plate of pancakes, she used the bathroom and then cleaned up. Heather and Elizabeth, having recovered some energy, got up again. Heather got back at once to her painting, while Elizabeth cooked up some hamburgers for the family. Liana had some food, cleaned up, fed Martina, and then had to go back to bed. Heather finished another painting worth 59 simoleons and grabbed a hamburger while Nicholas was sitting down for a game of SSX. Elizabeth and Caroline were studying diligently for their part, but soon they too had to go to bed. Nicholas eventually sat down to read up some more on cooking, while Heather went back to her easel to paint again. Martina woke everyone up, needing a diaper change, so Elizabeth went back to studying. Nicholas was now exhausted, so he went to bed, and so did Heather and Caroline. And at 3:20, I got my answer. Liana was indeed pregnant again. The night wore on, and only Elizabeth was awake. At 7 a.m., I got everyone out of bed, because the time had come. 2 weeks had passed exactly. The apartment had become too small, and it was time to move somewhere else. So, I put all of the furniture into Liana's inventory, leaving only the appliances behind, and that was it. The family was all packed up and ready to move into another bigger apartment. And that's where we'll leave them. All in all, a pretty messy start. But now it feels like I've finally got things moving. Liana is aging quickly, but so are her children, and things look really promising for both Heather and Elizabeth. I'm really hopeful that they'll be able to give her 5 days back each, but you never know what happens. We'll have to see how it goes in the next episode. Feel free to leave your thoughts and predictions in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye.